This lecture is going to focus on sectionalism, which is kind of the opposite of our nationalism that we talked about, where each section of the country believed in something, and so it started to kind of tear apart the country. And we're going to see the politics that happened around that. In 1819, Missouri applied to be a state, and not just any state. They wanted to be a slave state. They wanted slavery to be legal in their state. And at the time, there were exactly 11 free states and 11 slave states. And so this obviously caused a problem. This would, give the power in Senate that was balanced, that was half and half at this point. This would give it over to the slave states and allow them to make legislation that would help them out. And so the free states did not like that, obviously, and so it caused quite a bit of problems. And the other thing that it caused a problem with was that it would extend slavery into the northern part of the Louisiana Purchase. And at this point, it wasn't supposed to be up there. The idea was that if we just keep slavery down where it is, then eventually it will die out. People will stop doing it. Make laws that make it slowly go away instead of having to fight over it. But this extension would cause it to gain more power, which was kind of a negative thing. Going against slavery was James Talmadge Jr. He was a senator from New York, and he went into Congress and proposed a ban on bringing any new slaves into Missouri. And it also said that all slave children who were alive right now, as soon as they reached 25 years old, would be let free. So this would be kind of a slow release of slavery, kind of a slow killing of slavery. In Missouri, you could start with them, but eventually it's kind of going to go away. And the House said, yep, we're cool with this, we're going to do it. But the Senate, of course, rejected it and said they would not do it because the North, mostly, or states from the North, people from the North voted for it, and people from the South voted against it, and that power was balanced in the Senate. And so, of course, with the two sides being so far against each other, we know Missouri became a state, so there must have been a compromise, and this is known as the Missouri Compromise. The Missouri Compromise was pushed through by one of the greatest compromisers. You see his name pop up in almost every compromise that we're going to talk about going forward, Henry Clay. From Kentucky. He was the one that pushed it through. But what was the Missouri Compromise? There's a reason I have this map here. It's kind of important. So Maine used to be part of Massachusetts. So these two were connected, and they were both Massachusetts. But Maine wanted to be a separate state. They wanted to come in as their own state, as Maine. And so they would be allowed to come in as a free state, and Missouri could be a slave state. That would keep the balance in the Senate. The other thing that they said, though, that they added in was we don't want this slavery thing to happen anymore, and so we're going to say that anywhere south of Missouri's border can have slavery, but anywhere north of Missouri's southern border cannot have slavery. Okay, so if we look, this is the southern border. All right, anywhere in the Louisiana Territory that was up above that red line would not be allowed to have slavery. So, of course, slavery can expand. Arkansas can have slavery, but we're making sure that the rest of this land is going to be free. And so then again, hopefully weakening slavery, keeping it contained in its own little spot, and hoping that it would eventually go away. And there were a few problems that came up with the compromise as well. These pro-slavery members who were writing the Constitution in Missouri, because it was a pro-slavery state, they wrote into the Constitution that no free African American would be allowed to enter the state at all. So all African Americans in there would be slaves. And that almost shut down the whole thing, the whole compromise. They said, fine, we're not going to let you into the country then. We're not letting you be part of our country if you're going to act like that. And again, who comes in and saves the day here? Henry Clay. He talked to them and the Missouri legislature and said, well, we can't let you in if you're going to do that. And so the Missouri legislature said, we won't honor that wording. Just let us be a state, and we won't actually do that. And these people from the North and Henry Clay and a lot of different people really thought that this was the end. That was it. Slavery was solved. We wouldn't have a problem with it. We now had a line, and so it was good to go. And so they thought, this is over. But really, what did it do? This compromise just slowed down the debate about the future of slavery. Okay, so a lot of people realized that it wasn't over, and it would only get worse with time. And as we know, it did get much worse with time until Americans were killing each other over this. Take a moment to write out the answer to checkpoint number 1. So then came the election of 1824. At this point, America was a one-party system. They only had a Democratic-Republican Party. That was it. And so the Democratic-Republican Party had supporters all over the country, but the party was divided by region on which Democratic-Republican that they supported. And so in 1824, 4 candidates ran for president from the Democratic-Republican Party. They were William Crawford, Henry Clay, John Quincy Adams, and Andrew Jackson. And so Crawford is this guy. All right. Henry Clay is this guy. Okay. John Quincy Adams. Do purple. John Quincy Adams is this guy, and then Andrew Jackson, last but not least, is this guy right here. All right, and so these were the people that ran for president in 1824. And William Crawford ran based on, he was from Georgia, and he believed that states' rights and the Constitution should be exactly what's said in it. You can't add a whole bunch of other stuff to it. We can't add these implied powers that we've talked about. All right. Henry Clay, he was from Kentucky. He ran on something called the American system. He believed that there needs to be a national bank. There needs to be protective tariffs. There needs to be nationwide internal improvements. So the federal government is responsible for making sure that all of these things happen to improve the country. John Quincy Adams was also a little bit nationalist. He was from New England. He liked all those improvements that Henry Clay was talking about, but he did not like tariffs. He didn't want those happening. And then Andrew Jackson was from Tennessee, and he ran based on basically like, I'm just like you guys. You all know me. I'm famous. I'm good. Okay, he was from Tennessee. He ran on his leadership experience that he had and the military experience that he had as being the hero of the Battle of New Orleans and a lot of other things that he had done. And so the people voted. Jackson won the popular vote. He had enough to actually win, but nobody won the majority in the Electoral College. And so what happened in that case is the House of Representatives gets to pick from the top 3 vote getters. Okay, so what that does, that eliminates Henry Clay, all right, because he was not one of those 3. So Henry Clay was ruled out. He was the 4th, and so he wasn't eligible to be the president, but he did have a lot of influence because he was the Speaker of the House, right? And so he came out and publicly supported John Quincy Adams, and then, of course, that power, those votes from Henry Clay went over to John Quincy Adams, and he easily won to become the 6th president of the United States. So that's John Quincy Adams was the 6th president of the United States. And the Jackson supporters were very angry. They said this is a corrupt bargain, they called it. Okay, they said that Adams and Clay had gotten together and made this deal under the table, and Adams had made Henry Clay his Secretary of State. So they said, oh, you decided that if he gave you that job, you would give him your votes. And so Adams and Clay, of course, say, we didn't do that, we did nothing wrong, all that kind of stuff. But the party, the Democratic Republican Party, at this point split into 2 different parties. It split into the Democrats, which were the supporters of Andrew Jackson, okay, and then the National Republicans, which were the supporters of Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams and those people. So John Quincy Adams wanted to do a lot of things with his presidency. He wanted to do a lot of nationalist things to improve the country in a lot of different ways, but most of the people, or a lot of the people, thought that it was back to these federalist ideals and the government taking control of everything, and they thought, you're wasting money, right? This is not the federal government spot. This should be a state government thing. We should be able to make our own decisions on this. And so that they thought that, so he wasn't able to get much done. He did get funds granted to improve some rivers, some harbors, go in and help those things out, and then also to extend the national road a little bit longer. And so he made some gains, but because of this corrupt bargain, because of the arguing, because of all this stuff, he didn't really get much accomplished as a president. Then the election of 1828 came up between John Quincy Adams, who again hadn't gotten much done really, versus Andrew Jackson, who was still angry about the corrupt bargain and all of that kind of stuff that he would continually bring up. And so this kind of started modern politics. What there was there a lot of mudslinging. And mudslinging is just trying to ruin your opponent's reputation with insults. So you're saying bad things about them. You're not saying anything good about what you believe in. You're just saying bad things about them to try and make them look bad. All right. So Adams said things like that Jackson was incompetent. He couldn't do the job. He was just a general. He didn't have any ideas, and that he was angry all the time. And that anger would not do a very good job of being president when you have to deal with other countries and deal with people and all that kind of stuff. Jackson said that Adams was completely out of touch with the regular person. He was an aristocrat, he was a fancy pants, and that he only had the wealthy people's interests in mind and not everyone's interests. And so Jackson won this election of 1828 with 56% of the popular vote. So he won by quite a bit. He got about 178 of the 261 electoral votes. And he was supported mostly by the people in the West and the South. These rural and small town men really thought that he was the one that represented their interests better than John Quincy Adams, who again was seen more as kind of a fancy pants rich person president. Take a moment to write out 3 questions you have from the notes so far. If you don't have any, make 3 test questions, please.